Welcome back to Donnybrook. Next up, our guests tonight are two esteemed state senators. Senator Bill Eigel from St. Charles, a Republican. State Senator Tracy McCreery, a Democrat from St. Louis County. And of course, leading us tonight will be the star of our show, Bill McClellan. But no, let me just start softly enough. Tell us each of you tell us what your top priority is right now for the coming 23, the session you're in, the 2023 session. What are you focused on most?
Sure. Well, for me, it's something that I've been focused on for as long as I've been in the state Senate, and that is cutting taxes. And the issue probably that is at the top of the minds of most Missourians right now as it relates to taxation is personal property tax. I'm guessing everyone at this table had the unfortunate experience of opening up their personal property tax bills and seeing an increase, even if you didn't buy a new vehicle. And you know, Missouri is one of the few states that still has personal property tax on vehicles, so that's been a real focus to find a way if we can get away from this bad form of taxation and ease up a little bit on the tax burden for Missourians.
You're a little late. I just bought my daughter a car. How about you, Tracy?
Well, my top priority is getting a bipartisan bill passed that would expand health care coverage for new moms who are low income. Right now, when a low income mother on Medicaid gives birth, her insurance cuts off after 60 days. But most of the deaths that happen for new mothers happens between day 60 and day 365. So there's a bipartisan push to expand that Medicaid coverage for those women so that we can keep more mothers alive and, more importantly, keep babies, those newborn babies, help them have moms throughout their lives.
All right, let me flip it. Are you for that bipartisan, part of that bipartisan push? And what do you think about cutting the personal property tax? Well, let's start with you.
I'll go first. So we had a special session last fall that dealt with cutting taxes, and I supported that bill. You know, although a lot of folks didn't get much back, you know, I heard loud and clear that people don't want to pay any more in taxes. So I did support that, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about what you have planned.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to support Tracy's bipartisan effort?
Well, I don't know if there's a single person in this state that wouldn't want to do everything we can to help moms and newborn kids get off on the right foot. I guess my only concern about that is, you know, we'll have to look at the details because, you know, Medicaid right now is our biggest government program. It's also found to have billions of dollars of waste in that program. And a lot of times we've moved to expand services under the Medicaid programs and really haven't gotten some of the outcomes we're looking for. In fact, that's kind of why we're having some of these discussions now. So I am absolutely looking for ways to help our most vulnerable populations, and I think that my colleague Tracy has identified one of those populations, but we've got to be real careful that using government to do this a lot of times produces outcomes we weren't expecting. So we'll see when it comes to the floor, and we'll take a look.
Well, I just want to add,
sure.
So the Republicans have been in charge of Missouri Medicaid now for 20 years, and so I think, and I will give a shout out to the Republican Party and those that lead that Missouri Medicaid, Missouri Health Net. I think they've done a great job of reducing the rolls and cleaning up waste, fraud, and abuse. And we're about to hit a point with Missouri Medicaid where hundreds of thousands of people are going to have to be reauthorized, recertified for that program. And some estimates are that about 200,000 Missourians will come off that. So my hope is that you'll see where, as people are coming off at the end of this pandemic, that it fiscally makes sense.
But you also did oppose Medicaid expansion, as your party did.
I did.
And is there any reason to believe you're suddenly going to embrace it as something that most Missourians at the polls felt should be expanded, and that, you know, that, well, how do you respond? I'd be surprised to hear anything you did that would support Medicaid.
I don't have a long track record of supporting the expansion of government. So this would be a small, I think, expansion of government, but an expansion nonetheless. And we talk about the Republican control of Medicaid, but for the 6 years I've been in the Missouri Senate, we haven't passed a single reform of the Medicaid program, which has allowed the cost of the Medicaid program to continue to grow. And quite frankly, at the rate of growth we're seeing in our Medicaid program right now, I'm very concerned that this is not going to be a sustainable program in the next 10 to 15 years. And if that occurs, then it's not just going to be the new moms that are affected by that, but it'll be everybody that's on that program that could be seriously harmed if we don't take action now.
Well, Senator, you formed an exploratory committee to run for governor, correct?
That's correct.
Is this going to be a big issue in your campaign, and how do you expect your opponents to feel about this? You're all on the same page, aren't you?
Well, if we could, for every day I've had that all Republicans are on the same page, I don't know if that would be very
Well,
much.
no, I mean as far as Medicaid and gubernatorial campaign is what I'm
Well,
saying.
maybe in a broader sense, I think the Republican Party right now is asking itself, what kind of future do we really want for the state of Missouri? You know, just over the past 6 years where we've had a Republican governor and these supermajorities of Republicans, we've dramatically increased the size of government in Jefferson City. We've more than doubled the spending coming out of Jefferson City since 2010. And there are a lot of Republicans that turn on their TV every night, actually Republicans and Democrats, and they're looking at other states like Texas and Florida who are growing, who are prospering, and they're asking themselves, we have bigger supermajorities of Republicans in this state. Why aren't we prospering, and why aren't people moving to the state of Missouri like they are to those other states? So I think my challenge is to articulate a vision of a better Missouri that we could get to tomorrow that we're not living in today. What does that look like for me? Well, getting rid of personal property tax is one of them. I'll tell you, a lot in our rural areas, we're talking about protecting our farmland from being bought by foreign entities. In fact, I think that's another bipartisan issue, that we want to protect our food supply from foreign countries that maybe don't value it as much as we do. So that's another thing that we're going to be taking a look at. And certainly there are a lot of social issues and elements. I've always defined the proper role of government as protecting the rights of its citizens. And if we get back to that base, we'll be successful.
I didn't mean to give you too much of a commercial there.
Well, no, it's okay.
How did I do?
Right,
How did
but
I do?
did.
It's
But I
fine commercial, with except there's a certain self-awareness that people are not moving to Missouri under
right.
Republican rule. Is it possible that the formula of low taxation and low services near the bottom in the country, having the lowest paid workforce in America, in the state government, having among the lowest support, the lowest state effort on higher education, K through 12 education, corrections, the patrol, you name it, all the things government does, we are near the bottom. Is it possible that that has something to do with the fact that it isn't working so well?
Well, I think this is not going to come as a surprise to you. I might have a little different perspective here. For example, you talk about the state workforce. We have the statistic you cite of a low average pay for our state workforce. You know, there are other states of our size, Indiana being a good example, where they have half of the state workforce that we have. And my question is, why do we have so many folks to provide effectively the same services that a state of similar size is providing in their states? And that's a question, quite frankly, that we haven't answered. And, you know, I've never been afraid to hold my own party accountable. And like I said, in each of those programs, higher education, K-12 education, Medicaid spending, by every standard, we are spending and throwing more money at government in the state of Missouri, adjusted for inflation, than we ever have in the history of our state. And yet, in spite of all that sacrifice by the taxpayer, the state is not growing.
And so you'd cut the state, the government force, the state workers?
Let me give you an example. We have a 55,000 state worker workforce in this state. But at any given time, in fact, right now, about 7,000 of those positions are empty. And we're paying and appropriating the dollars anyway. My question is, why are we doing that?
So,
why are we doing
so
this?
you would cut the number of state workers?
I think that you could start by cutting the empty positions in the state workforce.
Would you then raise the work for a pay, or you save money for the taxpayers?
I think you could do both. Honestly, I think you could do both. If you bring the number of state workers down, make that government more efficient, you could have a much better product on the other side.
Tracy, what's your reaction?
Well, that's a good point, but I'm glad you talked about Missouri's overall declining population, and our population is aging as well. You know, I think one of the things that could make Missouri more attractive to others, especially businesses thinking about coming here, is to focus on making sure we have access to affordable quality childcare. So we hear from business owners of all sizes that they're having a hard time getting open positions filled. Well, one of the things we could be doing, and I think there's bipartisan support on this as well, is to make sure that we are doing what we can to make sure that kids can be taken care of, so that that parent, if there's a parent that wants to get back into the workforce, that he or she can.
All right, Tracy, speaking of access, access to abortion right, abortion services, reproductive right, freedom, has been virtually eliminated in the state of Missouri at this point.
Well, and it really was, we basically didn't have access to abortion even before the Dobbs decision.
One. but now that it's none, how do you think that's impacting Missouri's ability to attract people? And in particular, what would you like to see done? I know you're pro-choice,
Yes.
and you are pro-life. Talk about what needs to happen.
Well, what we're seeing now as it relates to women's health is depending on where you live and what your financial means are, you have access to different forms of health care. So a lot of my constituents feel very fortunate that they live close to Illinois so that they can get women's health care across the border. You know, but I do think that when people are thinking about moving here for work, moving here to come to school, that the state of Missouri is sending a message to folks that we're not truly all about equality, and we're sending a message that we're not really open and welcoming to all people, including women and also LGBTQ people.
Well, I'd say that the strong pro-life policies that have been enacted in states like Tennessee and Texas and Florida have not stopped the growth in population of those states. So it's difficult for me to believe that just because Missouri happens to be a leader in protecting the life of the unborn, that is somehow one of the things that detracts from Missouri as an attractiveness for folks to come to. I think if you're going to talk about what makes Missouri attractive or unattractive, if a business or a person has the opportunity to make $100 and they can give $5 of those dollars to the state of Missouri or $0 of those dollars to the state of Texas, the decision they're going to make is pretty clear.
We're already a low-tax state, are we not?
I don't know if I agree with that. I think if you look at all the different forms of taxation, you know, we have personal property tax. Most states don't have that. And we also have a very high rate of personal property tax. Part of the reason that's such an upfront issue in this state is of the 21 states that still have personal property tax on vehicles, we have the third highest rate of personal property tax.
Although our county officials, which in Missouri are mostly Republican, they're opposed to getting rid of the personal property tax.
Well,
correct? They're saying we've budgeted this in. We need this.
Typically, whenever you're talking about cutting taxes, government entities who are taking in some of the dollars from said tax are generally not going to be supportive. I generally don't hear government entities asking me to cut their revenues.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, to a lot of people, it seems like it's just shifting decks on the chairs on the Titanic.
That's right.
That, you know, because the counties say, hey, we need this money. The fire districts say, we need this money somewhere. And if you say, hey, we're going to give people a break on their personal property, and admittedly, I'm a guy who keeps my cars a long time, so I'm not buying a new car every couple of years. But it seems that if we don't do this, we're going to have to find it somewhere. But you think not?
You know, the conversation about eliminating personal property tax is not a conversation about whether or not we should continue to support the services that pretty much every person, regardless of party, thinks we should have. Firefighters, schools, ambulance districts, libraries. It's a question of whether or not that form of taxation, charging a very regressive tax that hammers working and middle-class income households just for the crime of owning a car, is the proper way to fund services in our state. Most states have figured out already that answer is no. That's what I want to do.
What would you replace it with?
Well, I think that the tax burden is so high that it doesn't need to be replaced. I mean, if every one of those taxing jurisdictions...
I'm sorry, I thought you said that you did think it had to be replaced somehow, no?
No, I don't necessarily think that it has to be replaced.
Okay.
Every taxing jurisdiction in the state right now that's getting personal property tax revenue is at record levels of revenue adjusted for inflation. So even with the increased costs, because I know costs are higher than they've ever been before, adjusted for inflation, every one of those local taxing jurisdictions is at record amounts of revenue. And if you look at the track record of when those jurisdictions have to go back to the folks, the everyday constituents we represent, to ask for more money, we've overwhelmingly found that the public is supportive of our fire departments, of our ambulances.
Okay,
So
Tracy,
I think we need to
does this
bring
give
that
the
down.
Democrats some kind of an opportunity to, if that they want to keep these services going, and they think that that there's not all that waste out there, that like the county officials are not wasting money?
Well, I think it's hard to compare state by state because there are different taxing structures. And one of the things I've noticed being in the legislature is although we can vote to cut taxes, we still are finding ways to increase fees and bring other forms of money in. We just call them different things. So, you know, I'll take a look at what the senator's trying to do, but my concern is like when you have law enforcement and firefighters and librarians coming in that are concerned about their budgets, I have to be honest, I'm going to pause and take a look at that because we have to have those services.
I'd like to return to the subject of what you call the unborn. Your bio, you're very proudly a Christian, and Christianity is a big part of your life, and I think your politics. Do you think Missouri is a Christian state?
I do. Meaning
the government is essentially should have a preference, for example, or let me ask you this. I happen to be Jewish. Are Jews, Hindus, Muslims, atheists, agnostics, do they have, in your judgment, should they have equal standing and equal precedence under our laws as Christians?
Absolutely.
So when you say it's a Christian state, should the government be governed by Christian principles that, in particularly, that might differ from those of other faiths? Should it give preference to those?
I think when I say that it's a Christian state, I would describe it as, our entire country was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. The moral and ethical code that have built the fabric of our communities, our families, for more than 200 years are intertwined with the laws that we make to live with one another. Now, when we get back to the question of the unborn, for me, and I said this earlier, the proper role of government, and by the way, I always think you should, whenever you talk to any elected official or politician, you should always ask the first question of, what do you believe the proper role of government is? And that gets to the heart of your question, because you're asking about how government treats its citizens. Right. It's to protect the rights of its citizens. Right. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and be careful about that last one. Right. Well, but the first of these is life. Mm-hmm. And if we're not willing to stand up and defend life, and I think we can define it very easily as something that in my mind begins at conception, then I don't know that we're going to be successful at the other.
Let me stop you right there.
Okay.
Because when you say Judeo-Christian, Jews define life as birth. That's how they define it in the Talmud. They define it all over the Bible. God breathes life into the baby, is the beginning, a breath into the baby is the beginning of life. Jews have a specifically different a different definition. You define life as beginning at conceptions. Jews do not officially define life in that fashion. They disagree by about 9 months. I mean, and there's compromises in there, but Jews believe the Talmud is the baby's head comes out of the womb. That's a fact that they disagree. So how do you reconcile talking about religious freedom, but saying, no, Jewish women are going to accept under the Judeo-Christian tradition the Christian definition that they disagree with? And by the way, I'm not even covering, there's a whole bunch of other faiths that just filed a lawsuit, as you probably know, against a whole interfaith group, including atheists and agnostics, who disagree with you about what you just described as official. How do you explain why Missouri should give preference to your Christian view, which I respect, about life beginning at conception?
Well, first of all, I don't think that my desire to protect a life as beginning at conception is necessarily a referendum on different faiths. I have always, I think there is a tremendous amount of medical evidence. I think there's a tremendous amount of scientific fact that we can point to say that life begins at conception. That is the moment. But in a philosophical sense, for me, I'll tell you that the moment I knew that I was pro-life was not the day that my first child was born, because that wasn't the day that I started acting like a father. It was actually the day that my wife told me she was pregnant with her first child, and that was the day that my life changed.
But so, you're just ignoring the fact that other people don't. I respect your story. My birth of my two kids was the most important days of my life, too. The point is that, do you not hear that other people disagree with your definition? I mean, you keep saying it's medical. It's different, and then there's a whole spectrum of religions, not just Judaism, that disagree with you. And why should Jewish people, why should atheists be defined, however passionately you hold it? Why should they have to live their lives based on a definition they disagree with?
Well, I think that you're then pointing out that if there's a religion out there that maybe is okay with stealing or other crimes that most folks would agree that is a bad idea, that somehow we shouldn't enforce those laws. I disagree.
I don't think my religion's view of the beginning of life is the equivalent of stealing, okay? It's a different position. We might as well be discussing whether Jesus is the Son of God, which I'm sure you hold dearly. People disagree with that. And I don't think well, Tracy, what do you think about this?
Well, I think that just watching the two of you talk reminds me that, you know, each person is an individual. And one of the reasons I'm pro-choice is because I respect a woman and those that she holds close to her, around her, to decide whether she wants to continue with a pregnancy or not. And in my opinion, when you're pregnant and the child cannot make it on its own outside of the woman, that's when I think that a woman and her team of people, her advisors, her partner, they get to decide what is best for them. So I trust women and their doctors to make the right choice. And I'm saying that not because I would ever choose an abortion, but I'm trying to be respectful of different positions on this.
Well, let's talk about something less controversial, guns. Is there, Tracy, what would you like Missouri to do about the tragic, I think we can all agree, we just said, and there's been more mass murders than there have been days in the year by a bunch, of course, Michigan State being the most recent,
Right.
but we had in our own city of St. Louis a school shooting. What would you like to see Missouri's gun policy look like, both generally and in particular with the city of St. Louis?
Wow, this is definitely less controversial.
Yeah, it's just...
Well, one of the things I'm most concerned about is the #1 cause of death for children and teens in Missouri are guns. And so I think we have got to have a conversation about that. I just don't think that that is where the state needs to be going. The other thing is I spend a lot of time talking to law enforcement. There are a lot of challenges in the community when minors can be carrying guns around on the streets. And at the very least, I think that's something that Republicans and Democrats should be able to come together on and just say, you know, that kids should not be able to walk around the streets with loaded guns. I just don't think that that makes any sense. And it puts law enforcement and innocent bystanders in danger.
Senator?
I think the entire debate about gun control as a subject is a distraction from the underlying issues that are causing violent crime, particularly in areas like St. Louis City in the first place. If you look at our national violent crime rates, they've been dropping for more than 20 years. And so I think that now this is a political issue, and the effort by some, particularly in Washington, D.C., to disarm lawful citizens in particular, I think is a real threat to those rights that I talked about earlier that we're trying to defend. So if we have individuals walking around the city of St. Louis that are not authorized to have weapons, then we need to deal with that and find out what those problems are. But if you look at, and let's take the city.
Who would that be?
Can I interrupt you
Yeah,
for
yeah,
a second? Who gets to look at it, though? I mean, one of the big issues affecting the St. Louis region is when the St. Louis City and county want to do something as far as gun control laws, and the Republicans in the state legislature say, no, we'll take care of that. And we're seeing it with electric cars right now, with the legislature saying, well, we don't want local control over these things. So if the community looks at something, Senator, and says, we think that what we need is, let's have a concealed carry law again. You know, that people need to get a permit to carry a weapon. Why do you say that a local community should not be able to do that?
So first of all, an additional restriction on gun ownership in the St. Louis City area is not going to change the fact that we have a prosecutor in St. Louis City that doesn't prosecute criminals.
Well, of course, but part of the problem, if you talk to the police, is that if they stop kids in a car and everybody's got a gun, they used to be able to take those guns away. They used to be able to charge the adults with carrying a weapon without a permit, and now they can't do anything. So the police would agree that Kim Gardner's a problem, but they say guns is a big part of the problem too.
Well, I've talked to a lot of those police, and they've indicated to me that the budget cuts that the city has done to the police force is a big problem. The fact that in a broader...
They have not indicated that weapons are a big problem?
No, they have
wow,
not.
Well,
I think for me, the biggest problem that the city of St. Louis faces right now is loss of population, overwhelmingly. People are leaving the city of St. Louis, and as they leave the city of St. Louis, they take with them economic opportunity that would otherwise go into businesses and jobs that folks would pursue at the exclusion of they're going to turn to other pursuits, criminal activities. And then we have a police, or not a police system, but a prosecutor's office that won't prosecute criminals and put bad people in jail. And so I think that's a real problem. And trying to distract from that by saying, well, the problem is actually gun
this is-
ownership by law-abiding
no,
citizens.
No,
I just don't think that's good.
I'm not trying to distract and say, actually, the problem is this. I'm saying that the police I talk to say, this is the multi-level problem. It's a cultural problem. It's the guns problem. It's the circuit attorney's problem. And
We have
for
the
you
same.
to say that
we have the
guns
same.
aren't part
We
of
have the
this.
same gun restrictions and rights in St. Charles that they have in St. Louis City, and yet things are so much worse in the city.
That's
of
why I
St.
say there's a
So,
cultural
so it
thing
has
going
nothing
on,
to
too.
do with gun ownership in the city of St.
Oh,
Louis.
well, okay.
right,
Well, you know more than the police do then. They would disagree.
And we have rumped down to less than 2 minutes, so we have to keep this really brief. But when did the Republican Party stop being the party of government closest to home? Because before you were born, I was a speechwriter for a Republican, and it was a key tenet of the Republican Party that Republicans believed in local control and staying out of local government. You've just described basically all your views. You don't live in the city, nor do I, and you're telling the people of the city of St. Louis what's right for them.
Well, so the government in Jefferson City, the state government, is the one that created the governments at the local area that it entrusts to effectively defend the rights of its citizens at the local area. But in the event that those local governments refuse to do that, which is precisely what is happening out of the circuit attorney's office, it is still the responsibility of the state government to protect the rights of those citizens. And
All right. I got
until that
30
happens, I think we're going to continue to have problems.
I got 30 seconds left. I'm going to give it to Tracy. What do you think about that? What I just asked about government closest to home,
Well, I
or
think,
anything else you want to say?
I think that we're in a crisis mode with crimes and gun violence, and we need to stop. What we've been doing for the last 20 years is not working. So I would just hope that we could all come together and figure out a way to work together on something to help St. Louis get the tools it needs to get things under control.
All right. Well, we do appreciate the two of you, Bill Eigel, Tracy McCreery, coming together and having a civil discussion
Yes.
here. And
Anytime.
thank you. You're always welcome. Thank you for watching us on Donnybrook. And Donnybrook Next Up. We'll be seeing you next Thursday night. Good night.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.